So here we have the younger generation. Your job is to work out which one might be the odd one out, who doesn't learn anything, or maybe doesn't learn very much, and who's missing. Perhaps the ghost of Eva Smith, because she is young and obviously has her life cut short. She's missing. So this is the first slide of quotations, and we can see we've got lots of quotations spoken by SHEILA. Now we need to remember that SHEILA is young. We don't know quite how young, but she's certainly in her 20s, probably the same age as Eva Smith. If you think about the names, Eva, SHEILA, SHEILA, Eva, they're designed to, you're supposed to think that we've got two people probably born roughly at the same time, one who was born to privilege and one who was not, who struggled with life and ultimately was treated badly by every member of this family. So we'll just look at some of these quotations. Obviously, again, pause it, screenshot it, whatever it takes to look at some of these quotations and pick out the ones you think you can use to write about it. What I want us to learn, though, is that she is the character, I believe anyway, who seems to learn the most from the lessons the inspector teaches her. At the beginning, she's a daddy's girl, and we can see that because she says, I'm sorry, Daddy, and she looks attentive. That means that she's kind of staring at him, idolising her own father. But it's not long, actually, before she's beginning to question, well, I suppose, where the money comes from to lead the life they live, but also the way that her father behaves. So she says, but these girls aren't cheap labour, they're people. I would definitely use that quotation. It's a fantastic example of her questioning her father and the things that he does. But then she uses this little phrase a bit later when she's talking about the way she gets Eva Smith sacked from Millwoods because of the way she treats her, or the way she thinks she treats her. She says, if she'd been some miserable plain little creature, I don't suppose I'd have done it. That's quite a description of another human being, isn't it? Some miserable plain little creature. The fact that she's saying she wasn't, that Eva Smith is a beautiful woman, which makes her jealous and damages Sheila's self-esteem is one thing, but just that phrase, it's very judgmental, isn't it? The way she talks and describes this person. I suppose she has treated lots of people in this way. But it's not long before she starts to show that she's smart and she's worked things out. And so she turns on her own fiancé when she says to Gerald, why, you fool, he knows. And it's obvious that Gerald isn't used to her being the one who works things out, but she certainly has here, and it's not long before she's trying to make him see very clearly that he needs to be honest, because it will be the only way forward. And so that's what we get. We get lots of examples of her feeling very sorry, feeling very guilty, and also suggesting that she's not going to carry on the behaviour that she's had in the past. And the behaviour you would talk about would be that she was being very spoilt. Right at the bottom of the first column, you'll see she's trying to teach her mother how to behave around the inspector. So we have that relationship between her parents and her, where she says to her mother, and notice how this says, slowly and carefully, you mustn't try to build up a kind of wall between us and that girl. If you do, then the inspector will just break it down. It's very sophisticated. She's worked out how he works, she's worked out what he thinks, and she's trying to tell her mother, someone much older, somebody very formidable, how she should behave. And so that's what we get, and we get several aspects of that. The way that she tries to tell her father not to do it. She's trying to tell him she's not a child. She's trying to prove that she's an equal in this situation. And when Gerald owns up and is honest about his relationship with Daisy Renton as he knew her, she says, I don't dislike you as I did half an hour ago, Gerald. In fact, in some odd way, I rather respect you more than I've ever done before. It's a very sophisticated way of looking at the world. This is a man who's just admitted to being unfaithful to her and lying to her. And she's had to hear all this. She's insisted that she wants to hear all this as well. So we see her grow up in this play. We see her accept her own responsibility, but also look at the world and how messy it can be, and how you need to have a sophisticated viewpoint to get through it. And look at how she dismisses her father in the next quotation. I haven't underlined it, but it says, don't interfere, please, father. It's the kind of thing her mother might have said to her, but she seems to be kind of beginning to treat him like a child. And if you look a bit further down, when towards the end of the play, when they're trying to sort things out, she says, it's you two who are being childish, trying not to face the facts. So once again, she's trying to get them to accept their guilt, their responsibility, and she's not really getting anywhere. And she's saying that they have become the children. So she's talking about this kind of reversal. And then we get this very sarcastic. It's called bitterly on here, but she's being sarcastic, isn't it? When she says, "I suppose we're all nice people now." The idea that if the inspector wasn't real or wasn't true, then everything that's been said and spoken of is just fictitious, a lie, something unimportant and not true, which would render them all nice. But she doesn't believe that for 1 second. She's accepted everything that everybody has said, and everything that everybody has said is nasty, unpleasant, and she wants them to all try to understand that. And actually, the fact that they don't change scares her. She says, "It frightens me the way you talk." She wants change. She wants them to accept change. Everything about this is the idea that the younger generation is going to help society, which is good. It means that the Priestley, J.B. Priestley, the writer, has got optimism for the younger generation. But the problem is her parents, and if you look at the very last quotation, she says, "You began to learn something and now you've stopped." So her optimism is being blocked by the behaviour of her parents and the way that they've not changed. Now, Eric here is a rather complicated character, even from the description that J.B. Priestley gives of him as half shy and half assertive. That's quite a complicated personality. And we see that coming out in this play. He's about the same age as Sheila. We don't get quite a definition of exactly how much, but we get the feeling that he might just be a little bit younger than her, based on the way that he behaves. Anyway, we have these rather kind of boyish outbursts at the dinner party where he says, "All the best, she's got a nasty temper sometimes." So he's getting a little bit drunk, isn't he? She calls him Squiffy, and he's just kind of making a few jokes, but actually they do tell us a little bit about her, because we discover that she has got a nasty temper sometimes. And then he kind of shows up his own father, as he says, "And as you were saying, Dad, a man has to look after himself." He gets cut off there. You can only just see it, but there's a tiny little dash where his father tells him to shut up, because he doesn't want him to be telling the inspector things that the inspector may not need to know. So here we have this young man being silenced by his father. But not for long, because like Sheila, he begins to question his father's behaviour. So he says of what his father could have done, he could have kept her on instead of throwing her out. I call it tough luck. In other words, he's criticising his father's treatment of Eva Smith. And then he questions why his father treats people like this. Why shouldn't they try for higher wages? This is what's called being naive. His lifestyle, his money, everything he lives for comes from his hard-headed father's business plan. And I think his father is exasperated with him. He doesn't understand why his own son is kind of undermining him. I think he's very disappointed in Eric. So we have Eric, and I think Eric knows it, which is why he drinks. Okay, so we see this rather naive character who's a bit out of control. So if we can see below, it says that he is suddenly bursting out. "I've got a headache and I'm only in the way here. I think I'd better turn in." In other words, he's trying to run away from this situation. He'd really rather not be party of it. And because, of course, we know what he really knows, which is that he's got a bit of a secret of his own. We discover, of course, that he drinks a lot, and the bottom couple of quotes there are really not pleasant at all. He says, "And I didn't even remember." That's the hellish thing. Oh my God, how stupid it all is. I don't think it's stupid. I think that's the word he's using, but I think it's deeply unpleasant. And one of the phrases he uses about the time he basically forces himself into Eva's house, flat, is that he says a chap could easily turn nasty. So she was probably frightened of him, frightened of his drunkenness, frightened of his behaviour. And I think we shouldn't let Eric off too easily there. This is somebody who uses somebody, and we need to remember that. But perhaps we can see him changing and feeling very guilty. But then we do get the childish side continuing. So if you look at the second column, in his dealings with Eva once she's pregnant, he says, "In a way, she treated me as if I were a kid." Well, I think he is very naive. He does behave like a child, so it would probably be something that she would need to do, because I don't think he would have been realistic about the way they could have carried on. And then he gets very cross with his parents because he discovers that his mother has refused the mother of his child any help. And then we see that he becomes deeply unhappy and deeply regretful about what he does. And he says, "My God, I'm not likely to forget." We get another example underneath of him being ashamed of his parents. He says, "But don't you forget, I'm ashamed of you as well." Yes, both of you. And then we get something very similar to the thing SHEILA says. So he says, "You're beginning to pretend now that nothing's really happened at all." So he's talking to his parents. This idea that they've learnt nothing. He and SHEILA have created this united front of saying, we've changed, we've realised we're wrong, we're nasty people, we treat people badly, and we're going to do something about it. And they can't quite believe, both of them, that their parents haven't picked up on this and are going to change as well. And then we get our last quote at the bottom, where Eric says, "The money's not the important thing." And that's not what his father's going to think, I'm sure. It's what happened to the girl and what we all did to her that matters. So he's had enough of his parents, but his parents' point of view is that they have to protect what's called the status quo, the way things are. And Eric wants things to change. And this is every relationship between parents and children since time began. Children want to change, parents want to protect things as they are, and it's a battle. And this battle happens to have been dramatised by J.B. Priestley in this play. I asked you at the beginning about a character who might be the odd one out, and I'd like you to think about Gerald in this way. I'm not convinced that Gerald, one, is a member of the younger generation. He's slightly older than SHEILA, and two, that he believes that everything should be changed because everybody's behaved appallingly. I think he's a slightly more ambiguous character than that, and to be fair to the inspector, I think he also lets Gerald off a little bit by saying, "At least you made her," Eva Smith, Daisy Renton, "happy for a time." So we have some quotations here, and again I won't be reading them all out, but you can see he's confident. He says, "I insist upon being one of the family now." Then he uses this fantastically clever quotation when he says to SHEILA, "And I hope I can make you as happy as you deserve to be." That, of course, is a riddle, because if she doesn't deserve to be happy, he doesn't need to make her happy, does he? If we look further down, he expects people to do what he says, because he's annoyed when the inspector doesn't show him the photograph. He says, "Any particular reason why I shouldn't see this girl's photograph, Inspector?" And then we realise he's also a bit of a fool, because the next underlined quotation is where he says to SHEILA, "So for God's sake, don't say anything to the inspector." He hasn't realised that the inspector knows everything and hasn't asked a single question that he doesn't already know the answer to. He also talks about visiting prostitutes. It's a famous haunt of women of the town, which really changes the tone and shows that there might be a slightly seedier side to Gerald's life. But then we get a few phrases that make me go, "I made her," he says. "I made her go to Morgan Terrace." He says, "I didn't ask for anything in return," so we need to decide what we think of him based on that. Okay. And then he talks about his relationship with Daisy Renton. He says, "She didn't blame me at all. I wish to God she had now. Perhaps I'd feel better about it." So he's beginning to feel guilty about what he did. But then we get that doing whatever you like thing again. "I insisted on a parting gift of enough money." So he keeps this woman in the house, and he keeps her secret, and he keeps her hidden, and he doesn't tell anybody about her. And then he pays her some money, and he tells her that everything's over. He's in control. And I need you to remember that. Because occasionally in this play he's described as a knight in shining armour. I think you're supposed to believe that that's sarcastic. Maybe, or maybe not, depending on your viewpoint. He's also the person that begins to unravel the plot at the end, where he says there isn't any such inspector. We've been had, that idea that he's a member of the family, that he's sharing their problems. But the really key thing is the ring. He gives her a ring at the beginning of this play, which is a symbol of honesty, of trust, of things staying together and staying the same. It's a promise by putting a ring on somebody's finger. It quickly comes off and she gives him it back, but then right at the end we realise perhaps he hasn't learned everything. Perhaps he thinks everything can go back as it was, because he says, "Everything's all right, SHEILA." He holds up the ring. "What about this ring?" And he thinks he can just put it back on her finger.